All right, this is Infosec Decoded number 38 with our guest Dan Borges to talk to us about Tradecraft. But first, we're going to start with the regular news. Irvin has got Debian.
I do. That article about Debian
Debian 11.
being the new version of Debian is out.
Yeah.
Version 11. Um, and as everybody knows who's ever dealt with Linux, that is the most stable thing of all things. Just super slow to update, but that's the point of Debian, is to be that solid, trustworthy system that'll take forever and a day to update, but everything will work.
I think that's also BSD, but Debian's also easy to use.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when I need stable, I usually go straight to BSD. Debian sometimes has issues here and there.
But I got fed up with Kali because I write instructions and in a few weeks they'd update it and break everything. And I switched to Debian, and man, that never happens anymore. Same instructions for Debian 8 will keep working and working, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a new Debian out.
Yeah. And so is there any reason to have a new thing, any new feature that's worth anything?
Nah, I didn't see any new thing other than like using the 5.10 LTS kernel.
Yep. Yeah, well, I wasn't looking for anything either, but I'm not what you call a power user. I make a headless server and I just want it to do the normal Linux things and not make me irritated.
Yeah.
All right. And Alan, you got brain imaging.
Yes. This is a rather disturbing story about brains and COVID-19. Yeah. The UK Biobank, prior to the pandemic, imaged 40,000 participants, imaged the brains of 40,000 participants with the intention of performing a longitudinal study looking at long-term brain damage, injury, degradation due to Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so they realized that they should image some participants who had been infected with COVID-19 to see if there had been any changes to their brains. And indeed, it appears that there have been significant changes to the brains of people infected with COVID-19, both those who were hospitalized and those with mild cases. Yeah. They had a total of 782 participants, half infected with COVID-19, half as the control group. And they found significant loss in the of gray matter in the left parahippocampal gyrus, the left lateral orbitofrontal cortex, and left insula. And relevantly, a lot of this has to do with the olfactory and gustatory system. So all those reported cases of people losing the sense of smell or losing the sense of taste, it's not just because of some weird quirk of the virus. It appears that that's because they suffered brain damage in the areas of the brain where you sense the smell and the taste. So this is just a preprint. It has not been peer reviewed, but this is certainly a reputable organization, a reputable study that compared people's brains before and after. And so this is not a post hoc examination where you don't know what condition people's brains were prior to the scanning. They know exactly what their brains looked like prior to infection. So this is not a good sign for long-term health for people who have been infected with COVID-19 and people who will be infected in the future.
Yeah. And like I say, I think I had it, and I think Liz had it, but we both had it so early, we never were able to get a test and find out. And I did notice that I lost my appetite, which is not normal. And I assume it was that smell thing. So, we'll see. But what are you going to do? I didn't die, and I'm at the age where everything is kind of a slow decline anyway. So, something will get you. But anyway, that's what they said. I've heard people say COVID is not a respiratory disease, it's a circulatory disease. And it chokes various organs with blood and causes lots of problems, which is what's causing long COVID. So, yeah, it's not a small thing.
No,
all right, Yeah, and I got these nuclear reactors. I'm pretty excited about these. You know, the problem with nuclear reactors is they're dangerous, and you have to put on so many safety things, they get super expensive, but they don't contribute to greenhouse warming. So it would be really good if we could have more nuclear reactors without all the problems. And these guys have ones they're making in huge quantity. They make them use molten salt as fuel with radioactive content. And the point of that is it's safe by design. It has a plug in the bottom. So if anything goes wrong with the cooling, the plug will melt and it will just dump into like a cooling place. And if somebody bombed it, for example, they're considering what could go wrong. If somebody bombed it or torpedoed it, it would just sink and that molten salt would hit the water and turn into rocks and fall to the bottom instead of polluting anything very much. And then all you have to do is pick up the rocks to clean it up. And they say, you know, this is designed to really be safe against all the things that could go wrong, much more than the other kind of nuclear reactor like Fukushima that makes this tons of radioactive gas and dangerous fluids when it melts down. And so you can make a ton of these for cheap, and they'd be a lot safer and presumably a lot more acceptable to everybody because they're less likely to do tremendous harm. So that sounds like progress.
Put that salt on my steak.
What's that?
But can I put that salt on my steak?
I don't recommend that. Yeah, but the other thing, of course, is that what I'm really hoping for is fusion reactors. But it'll be a while before we have those.
I was gonna say superpowers.
Well,
that's how you get superpowers.
Yeah, they say that, but what usually happens is like this COVID stuff. Just makes you smell bad forever or something. Anyway, all right, and Kaitlyn has got the Hubble. Yeah, what's going on with the Hubble?
Yeah. So the Register has an article written by Richard Speed, going over what's going on with Hubble. And poor Hubble is having so many problems right now. So a memory module failed on Hubble last week, and it caused all the computers to shut down. Now, this is kind of expected because when you're in space, you're bombarded with radiation, which sometimes gives you superpowers, but usually it just, messes up your computer systems.
Yeah.
And well, these computer systems got messed up. And so they tried switching to like the backups of the backups, and that didn't work. So they tried switching to the other backups of the backups, and that didn't work. And now they're just like pulling out their hair. What are we going to do? How are we going to get this Hubble telescope working again without sending up another crew to repair it? Which is just kind of looking like what's going to happen at this point if we want it working again,
right? Because of the mirror being wrong.
Yeah. So back in I think it was the 1990s, the mirror had some defects, so they had to send up a bunch of astronauts to repair the mirror. And Hubble was actually designed to be serviced by astronauts in the space shuttle. Now we don't have a space shuttle anymore, but a computer problem could probably be fixed by people going up in the like a Dragon or something. But what's really interesting is, of course, this computer. So space computers are generally pretty quote unquote old because they're designed to withstand radiation and they're designed to be robust, not fast. So they tend to be older parts. And this one was designed like in the early 1980s. And it's a 18-bit computer, not a 16-bit computer, an 18-bit computer with 64 kilobytes of CMOS memory. It's called the NASA Standard Spacecraft Computer 1, or the NSSC-1. And it's falling apart, and they don't have much to work with.
So it should just run COBOL or something, but
it runs straight assembly pretty much.
Well, that would make sense. 18-bit assembly, boy. I don't know any 18-bit assembly. I don't think anybody knows any 18-bit assembly. What the hell?
Yeah. I really wish I could get some emulators out there for people to play with, because we really need engineers who know this stuff to be able to repair these old spacecraft. But
18 bits, there's got to be a story behind that. Anyway.
There is. It's because they wanted, they were looking at 16-bit computers, but they wanted more resolution for some of the variables. So they decided 18-bit for for floating point type stuff. It's really weird. It's not a standard architecture. I think it was developed by Xerox.
It sounds a lot like Spinal Tap trying to explain 11. I mean, anyway.
It goes up to 18. It's 16 is not enough. It goes up to 18.
That's right. Other people have to stop at 16. 18.
Yes.
Well, anyway, so Dan Borges is here, and he's got a book, Adversarial Tradecraft in Cybersecurity, which I happen to know you're pretty good at. So tell us about this.
Yeah, so the book actually came about after doing the CCDC Red Team and the Pros versus Joe stuff after many years. I just felt like there wasn't this other half of the learning process, which is like the feedback of here's the techniques we're doing, here's how you detect them. It just felt like every year we were kind of just beating the students over the head with the same techniques over and over again, and there wasn't this like full cycle. So yeah, the book, Adversarial Tradecraft and Cybersecurity, it starts with some high level theory, just some things that I think are like kind of important for these operations. It's things that are like that I think are both like common sense, but then are also like a little bit counterintuitive to traditional like infosec advice. Like one of them is the principle of deception. And in like a lot of traditional infosec engineering, you always hear like, oh, you don't want security through obscurity. You don't want to rely on deception. But when you're actually in a conflict with another person, applying deception to your operations, like, you know, just tricky file names blending in, helps tremendously. So like focusing on that and actually trying to hone that skill is important, I think.
Yeah, it makes sense. It also makes for a lot of fun tricks. I know Kaitlyn used it successfully in those competitions. I know a couple times people thought they were hacking Kaitlyn and they're just hacking into her honeypot. So that's...
Yeah, like Kaitlyn was on the national CCDC red team with us this year, and you did the Mac Finder trick, which was really funny.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool.
What's that?
So I took a 6502. No, 6800 emulator, and I threw it on a bunch of Windows machines, replacing Explorer with Mac OS 8 or 7.
So it looked like a Mac, but it was really a PC.
No, it turned the PC into a Mac. So you would log in, and then you would get the Mac desktop with the beta versions of Photoshop.
Yeah,
it was pretty great. So it's just like a, you know, and that would never show up in a traditional red team type test, but it's those types of deceptions or like understanding what computing environment are you really in, or like putting people in a different environment. Like that's a fun example, right? But that's what like in a more malicious sense a rootkit would do. It would change the way you perceive your computing environment.
Yeah, and you had some ideas how to use this against ransomware before we started, and those sound worth mentioning.
Yeah. It's so when you start thinking of like tricks like this, one of the things that I talk about is the principle of time, which is a lot of computer science you need to automate to get this like speed to keep up with certain things. But when you automate stuff, you make it rigid and you make like a set type of a process, and that process can be figured out by a human and then like outsmarted and tricked. So one of the ideas with ransomware is if it's sitting there and enumerating all of your drives and then going through all the files in the drive sequentially and encrypting them, you can place like honey files, like basically honey pots, but they're files that get alerted on when either their contents is read or the name of the file is read. So you place these honey files all over the system, and they can have trigger actions. So like this is a file nobody should ever see, nobody should ever touch, right? And if they're opening it, and depending on your sensors or your EDR or whatever you have, if they're like running crypto functions or all these other features you could, you know, add to your detection logic. But if they're opening these files that nobody should ever touch, you could do a reaction like shut down the machine, start your forensic process, right? And that would stop, you know, your important files from getting encrypted and then trigger your incident response process.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. And it's kind of what I've been hoping for, some kind of maybe something you could turn into a commercial product and sell people that would actually stop ransomware. And it's because, you know, everybody needs a cure and nobody has a simple cure.
Yeah. And there's a theme throughout the book, which is another one of these principles that I try to highlight, which is the principle of innovation. And so easy, it's so easy, and sometimes from my perspective, to change the game like that, right? When something's set in stone, like malware, ransomware, you can innovate on it and you can write a detection or write a tool and automate existing technologies. And I feel like a lot of times, not so much the students, I feel like the students do innovate a lot nowadays, but like I feel like people just get stuck in their ways, you know what I mean, where they're like, you know, I need a product or I need a solution to help me do this, and like with computers, like we just forget how easy it is to innovate, right? Like to just write a program and tie two tools together. So that's like an overall arching theme throughout the book is like, yeah, here's tools that can solve your job for you now today with this specific problem, but don't be afraid to innovate. Don't be afraid to go out there and write your own tools or dig into the tools you're using and figure out how they work and just tweak them a little bit.
Yeah. But I think that's when you have relatively advanced staff. I mean, most like small to medium business, they're pretty much stuck with off the shelf stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. And
Yeah.
and that's another thing that I talk about too, is just like when you're building out your team, like for a competition like CCDC, right? You need the most important thing you can build out is expertise, right? Having the right talent on your team and people to take on the right projects. And then I also talk about like you want this expertise or talent to own all the projects on your team. And then it's really important not to take on too many projects. Like you can't overburden your team. You got to let these people have room to work within their lanes.
Yes, this is, I think, a huge issue. I find the sort of square corporate managers are always want everything done on a deadline, and the creative people need to be treated more like artists, where they have some flexibility. And one of my hacker type friends always keep saying you're trying too hard, because you have to like not be under pressure and pushing. You have to be like a kid playing to really do good work in this creative area, and that is perennially hard for the deadline oriented suit guys to get.
Yeah, I really like that. Like when I was writing the book, I was constantly under these deadlines and these, you have to meet all of these publisher deadlines and get everything done by a certain time. And I had read this really great quote by Seth Rogen, I think it was, who just wrote Your Book, which is a book, he wrote. And he was like, nobody's ever reading a book and they're like, oh, I bet this made all the deadlines. I bet this chapter got in on time, right? Like,
Yeah.
No, they're looking at the content and the quality of the content.
I remember an interview with Bill Gates about 20 years ago when he was the CEO of Microsoft. And he said, why is your product always like 6 or 9 months late? And he said, well, we're working on it. And then the engineers say, well, this is not ready yet and we need more time. And so we have to push out. And he said, and this makes sense to you because no other CEO talks like this. What? I mean, everybody else, you plan the marketing campaign, you plan the discounts, you have planned a launch date, and therefore, ready or not, it's shipping. And, that's not really, I mean, there's two sides to that. And Bill Gates was on the other side, perfectly happy to make everything 9 months late.
Yeah.
Well,
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, Bill Gates also kind of knew his craft. I mean, a lot of these tech CEOs really aren't that technical, like, Steve Jobs. But I mean, Bill Gates knew how to code. He knew how deadlines work when coding, as in there are no deadlines. It's done when it's done.
And somehow, I want to say the logical consequence is that Windows is wonderful and Apple makes junk, but I can't really say that, somehow that isn't how it turned out.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that's the flip side of Microsoft is that although Bill Gates and the people at top knew, how the software is being built, they really didn't know how to run things on a human level. And so they had like teams competing with each other, and like they would have the person on the lowest rung be like booted off and fired. And that just created like this really toxic atmosphere and stuff. So
that's right. A really nasty business model. Yeah. All right. Anyway, you've got a few more news articles. And which in fact, wait, that's guy is Irvin. Somebody hit my ransomware.
Yes, your payment may be deductible with the IRS if you pay the ransomware. I know, right?
It's like a business expense or something.
Yeah.
This reminds me of who was it? It was Uber that paid the ransom, and then they said, "Oh, that was a bug bounty, so that doesn't count."
Yeah, that was a mess. That was a fiasco.
I think you need to check with your lawyer on this stuff.
So the IRS has not confirmed yet if this is true, but it is an idea that's floating around. Even though everybody is going, no,
yeah,
you should not do this.
I mean, you wouldn't want to be the official that said, "Oh, sure, that's fine."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the IRS is looking into possibly making ransomware payments deductible, but yeah, like all of us just reacted. Yeah. No, don't.
Yeah, that sounds like a terrible idea.
Yes, it's a terrible idea.
Yeah. So Alan's got broadband vacuum.
Yes, and it's a shame that Liz isn't with us today because she would love this story.
And you too. You and Liz, it's Liz and Kaitlyn and you often drop out.
Well, it's all about the broadband access.
Yeah.
And yes, and well, apparently there's a bit more federal government intrigue, interdepartmental intrigue than us civilians know about. The FCC, when it publishes information on broadband access nationwide, it's relying on information data that's being provided by the ISPs themselves. And it goes by census block, interestingly, not zip code or anything else, counties. It goes by census block. And if an ISP has just a single customer within that census block with broadband, then that whole block gets counted as covered by broadband. So the FCC is clearly a victim of regulatory capture by the ISPs. And so the Biden administration has come out with their own map. And that is entirely independent of the FCC, and it is not good at all. I'm looking at it right now. And while some states, such as New York and North Dakota, surprisingly have very good coverage, a lot of states have minimal coverage. States like Nevada, New Mexico, much of Montana and Texas, Arkansas, very, very little broadband availability. It's just terrible, in fact.
And a lot of California.
Well, a lot of California does not have the best coverage either. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this more than enough, how even San Francisco, one of the wealthiest and most tech supposedly connected cities in the world, has terrible ISP options or broadband options. Not even fiber available to residents of downtown San Francisco, which is just amazing.
And God save you if you move a couple of, a half an hour in some direction from the city.
Yeah. Yeah. So taking a look at this map really puts everything in high relief. A lot of the country does not have broadband. And as we were discussing before going live, this does have a big impact on children and learning remotely, or the ability of people to work remotely.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that this country is not ready for that.
And, it's one of the things Obama campaigned on. When he first went in was doing something about the digital divide. And it looks like we still haven't really done much about it.
Not enough, not nearly enough. But again, I think it's because of regulatory capture. The ISPs have too much sway at the FCC. The whole tenure of Ajit Pai was a farce. And so I this shouldn't come as a surprise, really. And Obama's not to blame, certainly.
I remember that was why I was enthusiastic about voting for Obama, was primarily because he was going to have another huge fiber rollout. And I thought it would be students for my jobs laying the fiber, but none of that ever happened.
No, of course not.
Well, I thought it would, but a lot of us thought Obama was going to do stuff he didn't do. I kind of liked him, but he wasn't, he was a lot less than advertised. Anyway, I've got one here that said something else, not a big surprise. Most developers of open source software, when they publish the software, how often do they go back to check when the third-party libraries need an update? And the answer is never. They never think of that. They never keep track of that. That's nobody's job. And typically the included libraries go out of date, and that does not trigger them to update their product at all, which in retrospect is not too surprising. But I think that's why everybody's trying to get software bill of materials and consider this now after SolarWinds and the other big supply chain attacks. All right. I see Liz is here. You want to take your printf? Oh, you got the printf format string, Liz. That's a really great one. You may not be ready yet, though. Perhaps not. Well, let's go to Kaitlyn's story and come back to Liz when she's ready, which Israel shooting down a drone. That looks pretty good.
Yeah, with lasers. That's the important part here. Lasers from airplanes. Yes. So there's not much to the story. The drive.com has an article here written by Brett Tingley about how Israel is using lasers, high-powered lasers in aircraft to shoot down drones, which is totally awesome. And hopefully one day this technology will be expanded to space. So we'll have space lasers shooting down drones. Yeah. So what they did is they just put a high-powered laser into a Cessna, like not even like a war plane or anything. Like I'm pretty sure this laser costs more than the airplane itself. And they flew the laser up into the air, and they just shot down drones that I guess Israel's enemies were piloting around. And it had a range of about 1 kilometer. which isn't too bad. There's room for improvement. Once they get it up to about 50 or to 100 kilometers, I think we can start having those in space. So
Pew, pew.
yes. Space lasers, here we come.
I've been waiting for this all my life, shooting the lasers out of your spacecraft, blasting down your. It's one of those things we're missing out. We were supposed to have flying cars and ray guns and all this good stuff.
Yes. Where are our space lasers?
That's right.
I
Exactly.
demand my flying vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And Liz, are you ready?
I need just a second.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come back to you, but that printf thing is great. Anyway, so Irvin's got yet more trouble in Texas.
Yet more trouble in Texas. That there is some fine print in the thermostats that allowed the power companies to remotely raise temperatures on their residents. Of course, they didn't read the fine print and didn't see that ERCOT has, when they signed away, that now they would have the right to adjust it as they want. So fun.
And all these people leaving San Francisco to move their company to Texas to save money, I think they might have some second thoughts.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely would if I was thinking of moving.
I saw the people on Twitter recording like TikTok saying, my thermostat got up to 80 and I don't like it at 80 and it won't go down.
Yeah, those are the people who signed away their right and allowed ERCOT to adjust it as they pleased.
But then, I can see how you might want to accept that for the lower rate, because during the electricity shortage, people were getting bills of like $10,000. So you might feel the need to accept a compromise for the lower rate.
The trick was they put it in the fine print.
Yep.
It wasn't something that they said, hey, yes, you'll pay less, but we're going to control your thermostat. No, it's just buried in the bunch of legal jargon that no one reads.
But you save money on your taxes.
Yeah.
All right. And Alan's got how to get hired by a criminal gang. Now, our students are all looking for employment, so this is real important to us.
This is an excellent opportunity to students everywhere.
Yeah.
And Brian Krebs has the story on Olavitas, who I talked about a few weeks ago. She is one of the key developers of the TrickBot malware that got arrested. And more details are coming out now. She lived in Suriname in South America and was transiting through Miami Airport on the way to some other destination. So she got nabbed while transiting through. And this is a story mostly about terrible OPSEC. We don't get a lot of insight into exactly how Olavitas, aka Max, was hired by the TrickBot people. But it is a story about how her OPSEC was simply atrocious, including getting her own computer infected with the very malware that she helped write, which then joined the computer to the botnet and which allowed the investigators to track her down. But at any rate, the TrickBot group or gang conducted interviews. And they had coding interviews with some tests and challenges, and then with some conversations, which Brian Krebs has reproduced here. And I believe these were taken from the indictment, Olavitas' indictment. So it does provide a little bit of insight into what TrickBot gang was looking for. And there's some mention of modifying the Firefox browser to do something. Exactly what, it's not entirely clear here, but
so yeah. I think the conclusion is that the criminals need better educated employees, and I think they need like a certification that you get.
This is a good idea. Yes, like the
yeah. There's already 1,000 other certifications. There ought to be one for like writing malware.
The criminal OPSEC cert.
Yeah, maybe the EC Council. That might be the next one. Certified malware developer or something.
Yeah, we need like some kind of honeypot certification. Teaches them bad habits. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, well, of course, all our stuff is completely sanitary and tidy and clean, and we never do anything sleazy, but other people.
Ever.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, and I've got Microsoft has I didn't know this. Microsoft appears to own Binwalk, and they've turned it into a cloud-based tool that will test your firmware for vulnerabilities. You just upload your firmware and it will give you a nice graphical display of its vulnerabilities. So this sounds pretty awesome. I've used Binwalk for a long time, and I didn't know it could do all this stuff. So, and again, then they say firmware is incredibly vulnerable, never updated properly, and we really need to take a good look at the firmware, which makes total sense. Your defense solutions do not look in the firmware, and we really need to start doing that. Just like the supply chain, it's an unexplored area of horrible old vulnerable code. And then we're down to Liz. Liz has got a few of them here. The printed format string. This is awesome.
This is the only one that matters out of all the stories, because it's the most entertaining. I mean, hackers tried to poison the San Francisco water supply. Who cares?
Yeah.
This is way cooler. And it really kind of blew my mind when I read this story. So the security researchers realized that Apple, the iPhones were vulnerable to Wi-Fi deauth because of sorry, no coffee yet this morning. Let me back that up a second. They realized that the iPhone was vulnerable to a format string vulnerability with regard to its Wi-Fi connectivity, and all you have to do is format your SSID in a specific way to get it to work against the iPhone.
I thought that was hilarious. I mean, that's exactly from one of my projects, %S, %S, %N. It's the standard format string. You write to memory, some random number.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I did like one of their example strings, which was free coffee at Starbucks. They used in the article. So
yeah. Yep.
Troll all your friends.
And it crashes your phone, so the Wi-Fi doesn't work at all until you go specifically and reset the Wi-Fi module. Even restarting the phone doesn't fix it. So this would be a good prank. Of course, obviously, and I would make homework out of escalate this to remote code execution. I mean, that's a pretty standard process. Once you can write to memory, how hard can it be to get remote code execution? It shouldn't be too hard anymore.
Well, the researchers didn't think that it would be that easy to get RCE with it, because you can't actually control a stack.
Oh, okay.
Manipulate the memory with it, but it's still pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it is pretty cool.
Still pretty cool trick, and it's still. I mean, this is nothing new. Like you said, you've made it into homework. That's the most amazing part of it. Is
it's a standard simple trick.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like the third thing you do after a buffer overflow.
Right.
Yeah. And all right, and then you got the SolarWinds.
Yeah, well, the salient point there is that had companies configured their outbound firewall to lock down traffic, they would not have had such devastating results. And the companies that did that were okay. They didn't really get have horrible consequences like the companies that failed to do it. And in keeping with the theme of the first story, super basic control. So,
well, this kind of gets me back to what Dan was saying about his book. If you would just do like one clever thing that 90% of other people don't do, then they probably won't bother to overcome it. It's like that stupid club you put on your car. My friends that know about cars say, I can just take that off. And I say, yeah, but the other car doesn't have one. And this was back in the days when my car didn't have intrinsic endpoint protection. Like right now, I forget to lock it all the time, but nobody steals it because nobody wants it. But
Yeah. Yeah, you just have to make it more. It's like when the same principle applies to bicycle security. You have to make it more of a pain in the butt to steal it than the bicycle that's parked next to it.
Yeah.
So
another technique I've used a lot. Yeah. And then you've got the water supplies.
Yeah, that one was kind of interesting just because I didn't realize this. It went unreported, but somebody tried to somebody was actually able to compromise one of the water treatment plants computers in San Francisco. And because again, using same as happened in Florida and with the power accounts, people leave TeamViewer on these computers. Do not change the creds, and predictable results happen. So you know, they're like, oh, everything's fine, nothing happened, but this threat actor was in their systems for at least 24 hours and in the computer that was used to control how the water treatment supplies are handled. So
yeah. Well, I love the graphics. They got 8-bit sharks swimming in the pool. This guy's a genius. Anyway.
Well, you know, and it was like the one that happened in Florida, where it's like they didn't even use TeamViewer on those computers anymore, but they just left it on there for 6 months to a year.
Well, you know, you'd like to think that a big city like San Francisco might have a little bit more modern stuff, but since a lot of us actually work for the San Francisco government, we are aware of how far it is from that situation.
Right.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, I told my parents, well, surely the person who is like the CEO of Ford Motor and the president, those people are very wise and they have competent advisors guiding them to do the right thing. And as they often did, they said, kid, you got a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. And Kaitlyn's got the last one. Does Windows 10 slow down?
Yes, this is a very good question. So NTDev is a blog and a person who has a blog. And they asked the very important questions. Did Windows 10 slow down with each feature update? And this is a question.
XP really did.
Yeah, and a lot of Windows does. And I've noticed this is a way of planned obsolescence, especially with Apple. They come out with these iPhones that don't nearly have enough memory, and they increase the memory requirements of every iOS version that comes out, just so that it coincidentally cannot run the latest version exactly when they plan it to be obsolete. So and now that Microsoft is doing hardware, oh my, this seems like a perfect opportunity for them to make Windows much slower, so you'll have to upgrade. And it turns out, yes, Windows has gotten slower over time, though not steadily slower. It seems to kind of go up in spurts and go down and go up, but overall the trend is, yes, it gets slower. And they looked at things like the installation time, which I think is kind of, something you do once, who cares? But boot time, oh my gosh, Windows, the first version, Windows 10 version 1.0 or whatever you want to call it, 1140 or 10.240 or whatever, booted up in 13 seconds. The latest version took 34 seconds to boot. I mean, come on. Reboot time similar, it began at 24 seconds, now it takes 39 seconds. Yeah, everything's going slower. Like Windows 32 apps opening used to take 7 seconds. Now it takes 16, so it doubled the time to open an application. I mean, it is getting slower. Now, I do want to say that some of the reasons Windows is getting slower is because it's getting more secure. So when Windows runs an application now, it does a whole lot of antivirus checks and sandboxing and all this kind of stuff that it didn't used to do before, which is a good thing. But it is getting slower over time, unfortunately. So
I can think of an obvious security improvement. That's at least another 13 seconds before you get owned. And
yes, you have another 13 seconds before the malware completely encrypts your drive.
Therefore, statistically, you have improved the security.
Yes, but if you buy Dan Borges' book, you will know that if you put your encrypted data on something like the M drive, and you have or your important data on something like the M drive and the A drive, and spread it around different drives, and you do something really weird like that, and you just take Dan's advice, that extra 13 seconds could buy you the time that you need to save your data.
That's right. You have 13
You
seconds.
like an undo button, like on those Gmail emails, just boot that process out of the CPU.
Well, it makes you think of those thanks canaries. I like the idea of canary files, but I'm not sure the user would appreciate having the machine just suddenly shut down a lot, but hopefully it won't happen too often.
As coming from instant response, I would be very upset if a machine got ransomwared and then instantly shut down before I could run, memory dump. but I'm pretty sure users would like that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I did that. I was re-imaging a whole lab of computers at the college to like upgrade to Windows 7 or something, and it used up all the power and blew the circuit breaker. So I went trying to turn the circuit breaker on. I thought I was alone in the building. I was going down the panel, click, 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 and this guy came out. You just killed my power, and I was in the middle of this like long database operation. I'm like, me, I'm innocent, but he didn't buy it. Occasionally, people get mad at me, and I don't deserve it. I'm totally innocent. But anyway, all right. Well, I guess that's it for today, and we'll be back on Friday again a little bit early because we're doing a conference in the daytime. And thank you very much for coming, Dan.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. This is really fun.
Good.